Hey everybody, it's the Alarm Doctor again. I was working on a 10-inch Turtle Gong and I had it all apart and was doing a repair for a guy. So I decided to go ahead while I had it apart and do this little video on the 10-inch Turtle Gongs. There's several different exterior variations that I know of the 10-inch Turtle Gong. This particular one has the game well cast in the coil cover, and it has this small casting down here, and it has a regular nameplate, brass nameplate with a serial number on it. Now, a couple of the other versions that I know of for sure, and you can see on this one, as you can see how the casting is on the front plate of this one with the Gamewell trademark. And then there is another version that I have here. This one has the Gamewell Fire Alarm Telegraph Company, New York, just like this, cast in the bottom. The other variation that I know of for sure is the one that has more of a rectangular coil cover, and there are 3 screws that you can take off and just remove the coil cover and look inside. If you noticed in this black one, this other older black one that I brought up here, you notice that it has 4 terminals. Well, why does it have 4 terminals? Well, if you look inside, you see right up here in the corner, you see a resistor and a switch, a small switch right here. I don't know if you can see that moving or not, opening and closing. This bell was used in an industrial or institutional setting on a coded interior fire alarm system. And what this is a broken spring or wind down monitor. It's on a separate circuit, and it would show at the panel that there was a problem with a piece of the equipment that's on this particular system. Okay, here we have the inside of your typical 10-inch center wind Turtle Gong. And some of the parts in here are, of course, you've got your electrical coils. This is the armature. This is the armature tension spring. Main gear, main spring. Here's the winding paw, hammer paw, armature restoring lever, hammer, of course, your initial impulse spring, and your hammer release. Now, a couple of things about these and how they get damaged. The biggest thing that damages a center wind Turtle Gong is overwinding. You overwind the spring, it breaks the center out, and when this spring breaks and it flies out or expands catastrophically like that, here's what you end up with. Now, as you can see, that shaft is screwed up really bad. This bell will no longer operate. And if you're going to buy a bell and you can get the front cover off of it and look inside, this is one of the first things to look at to see if this shaft is straight or if it's bent. If it's bent like this, it's had a spring go off in it, and more than likely it's not going to work correctly. So that's one thing to check. The other thing that happens is because of the way the main gear is made out of brass, as you can see, that's the steel paws hit these gear teeth. And if you can see that one that I have the black mark on, it definitely doesn't look like the rest of them. So that's the second thing that usually causes major damage, is after all the hammering over all the years, you knock the end of a tooth off like that, and of course the main gear takes off and the spring takes off, and it causes all that major damage. Now there are a couple little variations to the mechanism on these. This particular one, you see this gear here, this one actually has the rewind flag option on it, which I'll show you how to set that up a little later. Another variation is, as the later models, the hammer shaft is square, and there's a bolt here on the side instead of this tapered bolt that goes down through this particular one. And also underneath here, and it's hard to see, there's a variation to the way that the hammer lever is directed into the main gear. This one has a big flat spring that directs the end of the paw into the gear. Now on the older versions you had this. If you look carefully right here, you see this pin? That pin right there is what guides the hammer paw into the main gear on the older versions. The biggest problem is again, like I said, when that pivot shaft gets bent like that, more than likely this pin is also bent or snapped clear off, and it's not going to work like that. So those are a couple of things to look for when you're going to buy a gong, or what goes wrong with them. Okay, what we're going to do here now is, some of the Gamewell 10-inch center wind gongs came with a wind down flag system. And basically the idea behind it was, once the gong got so far wound down that a small flag would drop out from underneath the bell bowl and tell you that the gong needs rewound. Now, I don't know what your policy was or is, if your department still uses a Gamewell telegraph system, but when we had our system in, we rewound our equipment after every box alarm. Some places don't do that. Some places just rewind every shift, the beginning of every shift. Whatever the case may be. But the idea behind this was so that the gong itself would indicate that it needed wound back up again. So as you can see, there's a small gear here on the winding shaft. So the first thing you have to make sure is this gear is tight on the shaft. There's a small set screw in it. It should not spin on the shaft. If it does, there's a problem. So we're going to put the cover back on here, and as you can see here are all the parts for the winding flag setup. We have this gear right here, this lever and spring setup, this long coil type spring. This is the screw that holds the flag. So as you can see on the bottom of this gear, there's a couple of pins, and these pins operate this lever. So what I'm going to try to do is show you how this gets set up and how it works. So first thing we'll do is we'll put the flag on. Now you have to make sure that all these parts will pivot without binding, so we don't have a problem here. So the next thing we do is put this lever on. Now this has a shouldered screw that goes in here, and you got to make sure that this turns very easily, that it's not bound up in any way, shape, or form. So this goes down on here. There's a stop pin right here on the front that comes down and hits. So we got to make sure that it's not below that. We want it above that. And I say above and below, and that's according to the terminals, which are on the top. Alright, as you can see here, we got another small pin right here. So this spring goes between this pin and this pin over here. So we've got a spring tension on this. Alright, now here's where everybody messes up. If you look real close on this gear, there's an arrow right here. So what you have to do is, first of all, you have to make sure that your gong is wound up all the way. Now when I say all the way, when you start feeling it really starting to tighten down, just stop. Because if you break the center of this spring out, all that damage is going to occur that I showed you before. So, and the other key to this is that when you put this gear down on, you see this pin right here, and it kind of in relation to that. You got to make sure that this pin is on the upper side of this spring. If it's below, it's not going to work. It's got to be on the upper side. So you put this in here, and you got to kind of finagle it a little bit, but you take your arrow and you point it right at the winding shaft. Easiest thing to do is kind of put your finger on this and hold it down. You slide that in there so that arrow is pointing right at the winding shaft. Now that flat spring I was telling you about is below this pin. So you go in here and you tighten that down, and you're done. And when you flip this back up, it'll catch and you're good to go. Okay, if you notice on this gear there are two pins. Of course this pin when this is set in the correct position, this pin will be underneath, or the spring will be underneath of this pin. Now you notice another pin up here on the top. You can see it through the gear here. Once this gear rotates around so far, it's going to come underneath of this lever and lift it up. Which, when it does that, it's going to pop this up and allow the flag to fall. So that's how this system operates. It's easy to set up. I know it can be a little confusing sometimes, but the main thing is to make sure that this spring is underneath of the pin. You use the arrow to point to your main shaft, and that everything spins and pivots freely. Well, I hope this little video on 10-inch center wind turtle gongs has helped you understand a little bit better about how they work and what goes wrong with them, and the variations. I didn't cover the 10-inch chain wind turtle gong because that's an entirely different animal, and that will take a video in itself. So until the next time, this is the Alarm Doctor saying, properly maintained, there is no faster, more reliable way to notify the fire department than a municipal telegraph system. See ya.